Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be back with some Q&A today, and today's question surrounds what should I do as a Catholic in my workplace? How am I supposed to evangelize? What does that look like? What are my obligations, etc.? This is a great question, and I think a lot of people are going to have similar questions given the different types of jobs and careers that we all have and the scenarios, which can be very, very diverse. Stay tuned. First of all, happy Valentine's Day to all of you out there. I do have an episode or a podcast on my YouTube channel. It's from a couple years ago, and it's about the truth about St. Valentine. So if you're looking for the truth about who St. Valentine was, then check it out, because I think I did a good job. All right, so this question comes from one of our subscribers. And he says, what are our duties in terms of evangelism, minus the fact that doing so is a mortal sin? And he's making a tongue-in-cheek joke there about what Pope Francis has said. What are your thoughts on our responsibilities in our workplaces? I'm in construction, but as more of an introvert, I'm not a huge talker, and with the introduction of electronics and headphones and such, job sites have gotten relatively quiet, with everyone doing and listening to their own stuff instead of communicating as they used to. I fall prey to this as well, but I always think about if I should be doing more than I do, which is just a small religious conversation with certain people from time to time, and also with construction workers being and acting like they do. Is our example in action and speech enough, or should we be having hard conversations with those who don't seem open? Really great question. So I want to take a step back and share a little story that pertains to what you're saying here. And I also want to read some stuff from the Law of the Church on this topic, because I think it gives us some insight for all of us. And then hopefully that can help to answer your question, and perhaps I can give some advice on things practically that you might do. So we need to look at the early Christians in Rome. And the early Christians in Rome were heavily persecuted, and many of them were martyred. But it was also not the case that they were encouraged to go out there and be cavalier and sort of seek martyrdom. There's a quote from one of the saints. Forgive me, I forget what it is. But it goes over how if you were to look at the lives of the early Christians in Rome, you wouldn't see much of a difference between the way that they lived versus the way that everybody else lived, except in their morals. So they were good Roman citizens. They fulfilled their duties to the state when it was possible. They ran businesses. They raised children. They did all those things. But they were basically known by their charity. Sadly, liberals in our day have basically adopted the heresy of Americanism. No, it's not a heresy to be American, but it's a type of heresy that was discussed by Pope Leo XIII, where there's an emphasis on the activity of deeds over the activity of the spiritual life. It's kind of like an inverse of the works of mercy. The spiritual works of mercy are more important than the corporal works of mercy. That's the major issue right now with the bishops in the States regarding the whole immigration debate. It is not the case that the bishops are wrong because they're advocating for caring for downtrodden people, which can include migrants. But what's wrong about what they're doing is that, for one, they're usurping the law in many cases, or advocating for that sort of thing, which has come out, which is sad. But also, the intention, it seems to be, on behalf of the bishops, a corporeal or a material concern over a spiritual concern. There seems to be an emphasis on acts of material charity over acts of spiritual charity, which are higher. And that's part and parcel with the Americanist heresy. If you want to read more about that, you can read, I think it's called Testamentum Benevolentum or something from Pope Leo XIII, and he talks about this. And this is a constant problem in modern life. Liberals have really taken this and run with it. I remember when I was at a conference for Catholic education when I was a teacher. It was terrible, but I was at this conference, and someone was getting an award, and he said, As St. Augustine said, preach and if necessary, use words. First of all, that quote is not attributed to St. Augustine. It's attributed to St. Francis. And also St. Francis probably never said it because St. Francis was very prolific in his actual preaching of the words of the gospel. And he was also extremely charitable in his deeds. But that wouldn't even make sense for St. Francis to have said it. It's kind of one of those misattributed quotes, I think, those apocryphal quotes that have been used. So sadly, the idea of just sort of living a good life and being a good person in the true Catholic sense has been co-opted by those who really just downplay the church's teachings. And that's unfortunate. But if we do look to the lives of the early Christians, they didn't go seek martyrdom. They didn't go seek to, stand on a podium in the public square with a megaphone and just sort of preach the kingdom of God and so forth. At the same time, there were some who did that because it was their state in life. Obviously the apostles went and preached the gospel and they were martyred for it, except for St. John. They couldn't kill him. That's why he was exiled to an island. They tried to kill him multiple times. And in any event, it's going to depend on your state in life. And when I was a teacher, I was faced with something like this because I was a Catholic religion teacher in a Catholic school. The school system was very modernist, so it was bad. But I had my own classroom, and the curriculum of the school board was half decent, and you could teach Orthodox Catholicism within it as long as you kind of were cunning about it, if that makes sense. And that's what I tried to do. And I remember there was one scenario wherein I was asked a question by a student, this young man. And he basically asked me, is there no salvation outside the church? And I don't know if I'm baptized. What does that mean? This wasn't, the parents were not forming their children properly in this school environment, as most of them don't today. So he had a question, and he asked this question in front of the class. And I knew that no matter how I answered it, I was going to get in trouble. But I also knew that here I was faced with a situation where I had to answer this question. I had to take into account my own life. Is it necessary to get potentially fired or whatever? Because that's the situation I was in. It was a Catholic in name only kind of school. Was I going to be disciplined for it? What about this poor kid who's asking me a question that is very important? These other kids in this class who are, listening with eyes wide open because this is a pretty big question. So I did my best to answer the question and this was a Catholic religion class, so that's why I was faced with this. But it's still, in this situation, I knew I was going to face a lot of flack for it. And I did end up getting in some trouble, not officially, but a lot of pressure from administration to cool it with my orthodoxy, even though I didn't face any actual penalties for that because I didn't break any rules. But I answered the question as best as I could. And I basically said, listen, in order to go to heaven, you have to be baptized because you have to be in a state of grace. And you have to die in a state of grace, which means you have to confess all your known mortal sins. And I said, baptism is by water, it is by martyrdom, so by blood, or it is by desire, which usually is attached to martyrdom. And I said, so you need to follow the 10 Commandments, and you need to talk to your parents. You need to honor what they say, and you need to ask them if you were baptized, and you have to talk to them about the faith and ask them to bring you to church. And I just sort of gave the best answer I could that was true, but very prudential, taking into account the sort of delicate nature of these teenage minds. And I ended up getting an insane email from the child's father, who was also a teacher in the same school board. And it was crazy. It was one of those emails. I never shared it with anyone, and the administration got it because he sent it to them too. But this poor man, he had a breakdown or something. It was like the kind of email where there was, size 36 fonts in bold at certain parts. It was just like a stream of consciousness, and he just was so mad at me because this, hate speech and all, it was just this crazy thing. And I faced a lot of professional backlash for that. But I was in a situation where I kind of had to. I couldn't avoid it. But you bring up a good point in your question about, what's the point of saying it in certain situations where you say those who don't seem open. And that's a good point, Because, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this in when he talks about, should we sort of admonish the sinner or admonish the heretic? Should we correct those who are in error? And he says, objectively, it's always good to do so, but subjectively, you don't have to in every situation because it could do more harm than good. If somebody is in a situation where bringing up Jesus Christ is going to send them off the hand, or they're going to fly off the handle, what's the point? Because, the point of preaching the gospel, of sharing the faith, is the salvation of souls. You want to see these people in heaven. You want to go there as well. But if it's something that's just going to be disruptive and not really helpful, is that worth doing? Well, Thomas Aquinas would tell us not in all situations. It wouldn't be worth doing in some. Because you might push someone further away, And that's a fact that we have to wrestle with. And you can only really know that in your own scenario. No one can really make that decision for you. Also, we have a different state in life depending on what we do. We have different responsibilities. We're not priests, unless you're a priest listening to this, We're not, missionary priests who went to the New World and knew that getting our heads chopped off was a real possibility. That's not the decision we made. We don't have the grace of state to do that sort of thing necessarily, because that's not what we signed up for. And if you look back on how the church had handled things like evangelization, it was almost always done by the priests. Obviously, people in their personal lives, but society became Catholic, And at that point, it was evangelizing foreign lands. And there's a reason why they didn't send, hordes of lay people. They sent priests to do so, which is really important, because if we're not careful, we can also be prideful in the way that we speak to others. Not to dissuade anyone from just telling the truth, but we do have to be careful that we don't look at these situations, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but just as general advice for all of us. We do have to be careful that we don't look at this as some sort of situation wherein here's my chance to sort of prove I'm right, or here's my chance to, win an argument kind of thing. A lot of these videos and stuff go around on social media, and it's, so-and-so goes into a crowded square of pro-choice protesters or something and gets in debates with them and makes them look stupid and whatever. I honestly don't think those are helpful. And I don't think it's really good that a lot of us revel in those things either as some sort of entertainment, because I'll tell you from personal experience, when I was working for LifeSite News, I was asked to basically go through the crowd at the March for Life in Ottawa, go through the crowd of pro-choicers and talk to them. So I did. And it was very much kind of like a Matt Walsh, what is a woman kind of thing. A lot of these really disgruntled feminists and pro-abort people. And I went through and I talked to them, and it made for good TV. But man, oh man, was it sad talking to them. I realized they were not in any position to talk about it. There was nothing, like they were vile. It was like really iniquitous, the situation. It was just really vile. Epithets and blasphemies and insults and screaming. And it was like the cacophony of Satan, And I felt a lot of pity, because a lot of them were young people who had been raised by various activists and raised in really poor homes. And I had this one conversation with this group of teenage girls who approached me and wanted to talk or whatever. And they were so sad inside. They were so depressed. They were so troubled. And after the conversation, I was like, man, oh man, these poor young girls, I don't know who raised them, but oh man. And I don't even know if the conversations that we had did any good, because they just hated me more. And it was kind of a wake-up call for me, like, this isn't a game, you know? Me talking about abortion with these pro-choice teenagers at this event who are like activists and they're screaming at me. It made for good TV. It was a cool video, I guess, and people liked it. But I don't know if it did any good. I really don't. And I don't think I'd do it again. I have a friend who works in corporate America, and he's a devout Catholic. And, he works in, his job is totally fine. I think he's mainly in tech security and stuff, but he works for this corporation. And he has to have these seminars and stuff, and he's been through like the DEI training and whatnot. And so he has to tread lightly. But at the same time, he's been in scenarios where he's had to speak up. And he told me a couple scenarios, like, there was one situation wherein this one coworker would just blaspheme a lot, like as swear words, And he spoke to him privately, not in front of everybody, privately, and said, listen, man, do you mind, could you just, when you're around me especially, do you mind just like not using the Lord's name in vain? It really hurts my feelings. I just find it really offensive. And his coworker reacted very positively and said, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Like, I mean, he could just use another swear word, And he just said, like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I didn't even think of that. I apologize. And it was a really good thing. He told me a story about he was at one of these seminars, and it was all this inclusion stuff. And he was very prudential, but a moment came where they could sort of say, it was kind of one of those things. Have you ever had, and I'm kind of reconstructing this from memory, but there's a situation like this. Have you ever been in a situation where, you felt discriminated in the workplace? And he said very kind of calmly and not in a combative way. And he said, well, if I'm being honest, we talk about all this non-Christian spirituality, we're promoted with the mindfulness and the yoga and the indigenous stuff or whatever, and all this racial stuff. And he's like, I could, if I came in wearing like an activism t-shirt for something that was against Christianity, but it was the thing of the day, he said people would be like, oh, that's so brave and courageous and you're part of the whatever. But he said, if I said, hey, you guys have Pride Month. October is the month of the Holy Rosary. I would like our workplace to put on optional training for people to pray the Rosary to honor the history of Catholics. He said that obviously wouldn't fly. People would be not very happy about that. And I might even be disciplined for like trying to spread religion in the workplace. And he said, that seems kind of like a discriminatory practice. And his coworkers piped up and kind of agreed with him, because the thing is, a lot of people believe those things, but they just don't want to talk about it. And even the person leading the seminar, it was a woman who seemed like your classic like DEI instructor. And he said her reaction was extremely positive. And she said, wow, yeah, that's not right. I never thought of that. Thank you for bringing that up, kind of thing. I don't know what came of it, but he prudentially shared his faith. He talked about things that were important to him. He did it in the right setting. He didn't alienate people. He didn't point the finger. He wasn't triumphant about it. He was just honest. People do sometimes react to that. But if he were to come into the office one day in October and say, hear ye, I declare that it is my right to talk to you about the Rosary because the Constitution says I have religious liberty, people would probably really be upset by that. But in a different setting, they are willing to hear that, So in your situation as a construction worker, I mean, yeah, you're going to have to be prudential about the kinds of conversations you have with people and the settings you have those conversations in. I don't think it's too much to talk to people and say, listen, man, I'm not here to tell you're not allowed to swear, but if you could just maybe cool it on the blasphemy around me, like I don't like it. Do you mind just use a different word? I bet you a lot of people will be like, yeah, no problem, man. I'm sorry. And And then as far as, how do you evangelize in a way of like, how do you share it? Well, you're going to have to do it by your conduct. It's not a situation wherein you're going to say, hey, it's lunchtime Bible study, You're going to have to do it by your conduct. And it's delicate, but, you can make work friendships, if that makes sense, And in that context of making work friendships, sharing stories, I used to work in, not construction, but I was in some labor jobs and stuff. And you spend a lot of time in trucks with guys and stuff like that. And you just talk and you just share stories about your life. Yeah, this is it's my daughter's confirmation. And, we're having the priest over. You just share it as if you're talking about the game on the weekend and just casually. And on the one hand, if the guy is hard-hearted, he's, you're a friend of his at work and he's going to see you as a regular guy and that's what you do. And that's cool. That might soften down the defenses a little bit. On the other hand, they might ask questions. Oh yeah. What's confirmation again? I went to Catholic school and I forget what they taught us. And then it's like, well, blah, blah, blah. And we explain it, or, if it's a feast day, it's St. Nicholas's feast day. I brought everybody donuts today. Or, it's Lent and it's like St. Joseph's Day. And I brought a case of beer for us for after work. I don't know, whatever. And you just kind of are honest about it. People celebrate all their things, And I think that there's ways to do that. I think that that's the way to do it. But you just have to be prudential about it. I want to know if there's anything else in your question that I can... yeah, I think that answers your question more or less. So yeah, is your example in action enough? Or should we have hard conversations? You shouldn't have hard conversations with those who don't seem open, ultimately, for no reason. There's no point. It's probably not going to work. And it might just tick them off more. That being said, if a hard conversation presents itself to you, then you have to tell the truth. But you can do it in a way that's prudential. If somebody is like, oh, you Catholics, man, you guys are hypocrites, like all that abuse in the church. That kind of thing might come up and you say, well, listen, man, I agree with you. Man, oh man, there have been a lot of vipers in the fold. And I just take comfort in the fact that Christ told us that there would be wolves among the sheep. And I can't excuse any of their actions, and they should be punished to the highest degree. And a lot of these churchmen are going to have a lot to answer for. But, Judas betrayed our Lord. It's clear. Judas betrayed Christ and had him murdered. So when there are churchmen who betray Christ with their actions, it's really tough, but these sorts of things are going to happen. I mean, it's a valley of tears. We live in a society where a lot of us fall short of what we know is right. And I'm just happy that, God gives me the graces to confess my sins. But that doesn't excuse any of the behavior. And I really hope the church gets cleaned up. That's a hard conversation. You're not doing any apologetics in the sense of like, well, did you know that the percentage of abuse is actually higher amongst coaches of youth sports and pediatricians than it is among active priests? You're not trying to explain it away or something like that. You're just like, yeah, man, that sucks. You're right. And I hate it as much as I probably hate it more than you do. Those kind of things I think go a long way, but you don't have to go seeking those conversations, Also, one last thing I could say as well, maybe this might not happen in your work environment, but I have found this not with coworkers because I don't have coworkers anymore, but with family. A lot of family members are just anti-Catholic, and it comes through in their politics and stuff. And it's just more of a thing where it's like, I don't really want to talk about politics and religion. I don't think it's appropriate for this environment, because it offends people. And when you say things like that, a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, okay, my bad. That's kind of a way too, because most people don't want to hurt people's feelings as much as we might think opposite. Most people don't really enjoy that. So if you're sitting around the lunchroom or whatever, and it's, going off about these crazy pro-lifers or whatever, on March for Life Day or something, or whatever the thing is. And it's just like, hey man, I don't really want to discuss this stuff. Let's just talk about work or like what happened with the game on the weekend. I think people, it kind of neutralizes them a bit. That it's like they kind of realize that, hey, I don't want to be the jerk. I think that can be powerful too, but it's subtle things. I hope that helps. I want to read from the Code of Canon Law, though, because this is a good question kind of about the general idea of evangelizing and stuff and it's funny, it shows Pope Francis is like not even obeying the law of the church that he is in charge of, which isn't uncommon. Pope John Paul II didn't obey it, and Paul VI didn't obey it when it came to Archbishop Lefebvre. But Canon, I'll actually share it on screen because this is enlightening for us. Canon 210. All the Christian faithful must direct their efforts to lead a holy life and to promote the growth of the church and its continual sanctification according to their own condition. So that's your own condition, your state in life, right? It's prudential. Canon 211. All the Christian faithful have the duty and right to work so that the divine message of salvation more and more reaches all people in every age and in every land. So you have the duty and the right. Canon 212. Conscious of their own responsibility, the Christian faithful are bound to follow with Christian obedience, those things which the sacred pastors, inasmuch as they represent Christ, declare as teachers of the faith or establish as rulers of the church. Subsection 2. The Christian faithful are free to make known to their pastors of the church their needs, especially spiritual ones, and their desires. Number 3. According to the knowledge, competence, and prestige which they possess, they have the right and even at times the duty to manifest to the sacred pastors their opinion on matters which pertain to the good of the church and to make their opinion known to the rest of the Christian faithful without prejudice to the integrity of faith and morals, etc. Canon 213. The Christian faithful have the right to receive assistance from the sacred pastors out of the spiritual goods of the church, especially the word of God and the sacraments. That's why the closures of masses during COVID was wrong. Canon 214. The Christian faithful have the right to worship God according to the prescripts of their own right, approved by the pastors of the church, and to follow their own form of spiritual life so long as it is consistent with the doctrine of the church. This is why suppression of tradition is immoral, is illegal. The Christian faithful are at liberty freely to found and direct associations for purposes of charity or piety, or for the promotion of the Christian vocation in the world, and to hold meetings for the common pursuit of these purposes. Canon 216. Since they participate in the mission of the church, all the Christian faithful have the right to promote or sustain apostolic action even by their own undertakings, according to their own state and condition. Nevertheless, no undertaking is to claim the name Catholic without the consent of competent ecclesiastical authority. That's why I don't call this Kennedy Hall's Catholic apostolate. Even though what I do is Catholic, but I don't pretend that it's an official work of the church. Canon 217. Since they are called by baptism to lead a life in keeping with the teaching of the gospel, the Christian faithful have the right to a Christian education by which they are to be instructed properly to strive for the maturity of the human person, and at the same time to know and live the mystery of salvation. Canon 218. Those engaged in the sacred disciplines have a just freedom of inquiry and of expressing their opinion prudently on those matters in which they possess expertise, while observing the submission due to the magisterium of the church. So keep in line with the teachings of the church. But this little section of canon law is important because it is our duty and our right to evangelize, but it depends on the condition of our lives. And it's also our duty to make known the needs of the faithful. And it is our right to receive proper formation and worship. And if that's not being afforded to you by your local parish, you don't have to stay there. And that doesn't apply directly to your situation, my friend who gave us this question. But one of them does when it talks about it's our duty to spread the faith as much as we can, but according to our condition. All right. I love the questions in the Substack chat. For those of you who haven't asked a question yet, feel free. If you go to the Substack app and you go to the chat, there is a thread. It's the most recent thread. It's the Mere Tradition with Kennedy Hall chat. There is a thread, and you can post questions there. And I'll talk to you soon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Mere Tradition. Until next time, God bless you all.